Intro.
Watch The Atheist Experience live Sundays at 4:30 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTAXP and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callaxp.
It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that is once again obligated to set aside our sexy, dirty talk good time to instead deal with some governmental bullshit. Tonight, I'm joined by President of the Trans Pride Initiative. Welcome, Nell Gaither.
Hi, good to be here, Christy. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm with Trans Pride Initiative. We primarily work with trans and gender diverse persons in areas of housing, healthcare, education, and employment. But we also now do a lot of work with prisons. So a lot of that intersects with healthcare and housing safety and anti-violence in the prison system.
No doubt. I mean, we're definitely going to be getting into it because tonight we're going to be looking at what happens when you try to put an entire gender spectrum into a two-box prison system, and hopefully what we can do about it. So I hope folks watching tonight will give us a call with your stories and your questions. We're at 512-991-9242 or at tiny.cc/callsex because the show is coming right now. Well, before we jump into it now, I'd love to hear what's got you excited this week. What's been turning you on lately?
Well, of course, one thing is being here on this show. And again, thank y'all for having me.
Well, thank you very much. Giving me the vapors.
Definitely exciting. But also I wanted to bring up a book called Beyond Survival. So a lot of times in transformative justice work, we talk about how to just help people survive. And so there's a book that's a collection of stories by people who are engaged in this work. And it's called Beyond Survival. And it's about how we move past just helping people survive. What comes after that? What comes with our successes, but also failures that we learn from. And so I'm excited about reading that book. It's something I just started. I'm about a third of the way through. And I would suggest it for anybody who's interested in specifics about transformative justice.
Beautiful. Well, I'll make sure to have a link to that in the footnotes for this episode. But I can appreciate why that feels motivating and powerful for you, because I'll be honest, everybody that I know, everybody I've spoken with who works in any sort of advocacy around the prison industrial complex is always looking for something that is more than just surviving, more than just keeping people alive. And what a sadly, terribly low bar we've constructed as a society.
Absolutely. And it's partly because I think some of the things in looking at how do we reform justice, we're reconstructing, I guess, our entire society and how we deal with harm in society. And that's a big job because that actually is integrated in pretty much all of our human relationships. And so it's a big task, and there's no one single answer to how we go about that and what is success.
Yeah, well, fair to say, I'm hoping that even if we can't, unravel the great mysteries of the universe, that we can divine some sort of answer, or at least a sense of a direction, because the reality is things are pretty awful with COVID and everything else right now. So, in particular, we wanted to talk about what it's like being trans in our federal prison systems right now. And I suppose even beyond that at the state and local level. So just broadly speaking, can you tell us a little bit about what happens when someone who is trans or is gender non-conforming is sentenced to a prison? I mean, who decides where they go and why?
Sure. The first interaction with the prison complex is generally going to be a county jail.
Hmm.
And so that's going to be whenever you're arrested, you're of course going to go through a search procedure. So that's going to reveal aspects about your physical characteristics that is going to in part determine where you are placed. There's something called the Prison Rape Elimination Act that was passed in 2003 that says you cannot place a person in a facility that's designated either for male or female solely on their genital configuration. But our experience is that most county jails do exactly that, even though
Hmm.
they claim they don't. So that's probably for most people, that's search is going to be the first thing that assigns them to one side or the other in a jail facility. Technically, there should be then an intake that happens in the next few days, and this is for whether you're in a jail or you're going into the prison system after you've been convicted of criminalized behavior. And there would be an intake that is supposed to consider multiple factors on what are your characteristics of vulnerabilities to sexual abuse and other violence, as well as what would be safest for you in the setting that you're going into. Technically, that should mean that you could go to either of those two binary options for male or female. But again, as we have seen over and over in almost every prison system, it's based on physical genital configurations. So that's really I think you would say that's the determinant for how you're going to be placed, even though there are supposed to be policies in place at the local, state, and federal level that give broader latitude in how you assign a person to male or female facilities. It really turns out it's genital configuration almost everywhere.
Yeah, so that latitude is really just permission to do whatever you want and to buy into these outdated notions of gender. Is that at all fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. We find that a lot of times people say, we don't discriminate. We have policy that says we don't. And they depend on that policy to excuse their abuses of people. And so,
Mhm.
sure, that latitude is just on paper. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, right now, our, very binary two-party political system is deeply entrenched in conversations about gender. And with the election cycles bouncing back and forth and everything being so politicized, how have the, national narratives around prison placement changed over the past decade or so?
We've seen some advances in the earlier 2000s. So you had some things like Michelle Kosilek in Massachusetts, who she initially won some rights within the prisons for gender affirming healthcare. And that's what a lot of the focus has been in the prison system, is whether somebody should be able to have access to gender affirming healthcare. And so you've had that began in the early 2000s and going up through Michelle Leal Norsworthy in California and Shiloh Quinn in California, who won suits for gender affirming care. You've also had some things like in California, they've recently passed bills that reinforce the ability for trans persons to be assigned according to their gender identity, not according to just physical characteristics. So that's reinforced those rights just in some certain places, like California has it. I believe New Jersey has passed a new law that benefits that to some extent. So these are a couple of things that the conversation has been around prior to our previous administration. When the Trump administration came in, they rolled back some of those things because that was a much more hardline anti-trans, anti-queer group.
Sure.
And one means that they used to do that was what's called the transgender policy at the federal prison level, which initially was published or for the first time promulgated under Obama. And then Trump took that and rolled it back to where basically they said, that the primary consideration for placement in a male or female unit would be genital configuration. So the policy actually was a violation of the PREA standards because it said you have to use that as your determination for whether to place somebody in a male or female facility. That was recently in 2021 moved forward by the Biden administration to where now they made a much more affirming, took a much more affirming stance where they said, no, you have to consider the entire status of where a person is and what their vulnerabilities are. You cannot, according to PREA and according to the DOJ and the Bureau of Prisons now, you cannot assign a person solely based on genital status to a male or female facility. So that just happened last year. That's kind of how those are the two main topics, I think, that have kind of bounced around back and forth between the cycle through the administrations at the federal level. At the state level and county level, I think those conversations have probably been a little bit less relevant. The federal level is where these tend to happen with a little bit more influence.
Because like governorships don't turn over from party as often as the national level does, or is there a different factor here?
I'm not really sure, but the feds seem to take accountability to federal law and federal regulations a little more seriously than the states do. And I think it probably has to do with feelings of states' rights. And so they're not as accountable to certain federal laws that they don't want to follow, such as the Prison Rape Elimination Act. States don't have to follow it. Although most states have, there's still 3 or 4 that still refuse to follow PREA guidelines. So I think it's partly that, and I think it's partly just states don't want to be told what to do by the federal system, and they want to spend their money and negotiate their power structures or manage their power structures, such as the prison system, in the way they want to. And so also prisons just have a real history of local rule, whether that's one system or the units not wanting to follow what headquarters say. The local rule is very much a thing in prison systems, that each prison is expected to kind of have leeway to do what they want to do.
Something of a fiefdom.
A fiefdom, yeah.
Sure.
It's very much true. And that extends back through the history of prisons in the United States. So.
Well, I know that this isn't the only part of government that has a tendency to waffle back and forth as the cycles change, but what kind of impact does it have to be getting such like mixed messages from the top every 4 or 8 years?
I think it's dehumanizing because it objectifies persons. So especially for trans persons, if they're getting different messages coming down, they're just an object in political play. And that's going to be dehumanizing. The whole prison system is dehumanizing, from just being in a warehouse full of people to the violence that's inside of prisons because of the economy and how the economy works inside prisons, to just the routine denial of little things like phone calls and showers and recreation. All of that's dehumanizing. And so this just adds a layer to that, where you're just a political ping pong ball that's bounced back and forth for political gain. One thing that we sometimes hear from people is that nobody hears me as a person. And so this is just another way that people in prison are objectified.
Yeah. Well, I just heard you say how much it varies place to place, but can you speak at all about any particular accommodations or special protections that trans inmates might have access to?
Sure. The main thing that gives some rights to trans persons in prison is, again, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, or what we call PREA. And PREA does a few things not well. So PREA says that, as we've already discussed a little bit, that you are not supposed to assign a person to a facility based solely on their genital status. So that is something that PREA tries to do, but it doesn't do much. For example, in TDCJ, we now know that there are somewhere around 1,100 to 1,200 persons identified as transgender. And we've only heard the entire time we've been doing this work of one trans person that's on a gender affirming unit. And it was because she had bottom surgery. So that pretty much is the exception that means they're
That
not
proves the
following it.
rule.
That
Yeah.
proves it, yeah. So there's that's provided by PREA. There's a little bit more of a guidance, I guess, and that PREA says that trans persons should be able to shower separately, and that's because the showers can be a place where people are exposed to violence. And so we've all seen old prison movies where they have the big gang showers. Those went out quite a while ago, but they are still common in older prisons. And Texas has prisons that were built in the late 1800s and 1900s that only have those big gang showers. So those you can't meet PREA compliance by offering the opportunity to shower separate. So PREA pretty much says that trans persons can't be housed on those types of units unless you make some sort of special accommodations. So trans persons tend to be housed on units that are newer, that have individual showers, or at least what they call 5-bay showers that have partitions between them. Another thing is that searches should be done respectfully and with the least intrusion possible to the circumstances. That's pretty vague.
Sure.
So, a lot can fall under that, but that's something that's in there that supposedly they're supposed to follow. And that in PREA guidelines that kind of goes into a little bit more specifics about how somebody can search under the breast area or along the groin area. But it's guidelines and it's not part of compliance. So they have an option of not doing that. Those are that's about it as far as the main consideration.
Any special protections?
Yeah. You have different various things like California does have some things. New York has some things where you can be housed separately. You have separate considerations for a trans person being considered more vulnerable, so you can get into special housing more easily. In Texas, we have something called safekeeping, and that is a housing designation for people who are more vulnerable to sexual abuse and sexual misconduct. But that comes with some negatives as well. There's a different kind of drama in safekeeping, and some of the guards use it for punishment. So instead of being safer, sometimes the guards will encourage people to snitch on other people, even if they didn't do anything. And so there's that drama that's in there that sometimes the guards create, sometimes people in the prisons create. There's also, because safekeeping tends to be mostly trans and queer persons, sometimes safekeeping housing gets routinely worse treatment. So they may always go to commissary last, so most of the items are gone from commissary. They may go to meals last, so they're shorted food or get cold food or the last and smallest proportions. They may not go to recreation, things like that. So safekeeping can have some benefits, but it can also have some negatives.
Theoretically an accommodation, but in reality, perhaps not so much. I imagine the list of like structural challenges is a lot longer than particular protections, but from a like institutional level, can you walk us through some of the challenges that trans folks face here?
Sure. By institutional, I'm going to take it that you mean kind of the prison structures and
Yeah, from like a standpoint of the organization itself, because I know we'll want to talk as well about what it's like being trans in a prison and having to interact with the other people there and just the day-to-day type of stress.
Okay. I think structurally, of course, it's one thing is that it's divided into a gender binary, and not
Mhm.
everybody is going to fit that binary, and not
Right.
everybody is going to fit um, the characteristics that are stereotypically associated with the binary.
Mm,
That's
mhm.
going to cause problems with persons and how they interact trying to be force fit into a binary that doesn't fit them. It also there's I think you could consider the prison economy as part of the structure. And
Mm,
so for trans persons going into a prison, they're entering a system that has its own economy. And a lot of the non-trans persons in the prison system will consider that a person is trans only for sex, and because sex is a means of engaging in the prison economy.
mhm,
And so a trans person is pretty much immediately taken as a sex object in the prison system.
mm,
Um, and when when that happens, then they become an object of extortion. They become an object of harassment. They become expected to perform certain activities, whether it's washing clothes or cleaning a cell for people. They're also, because of the organizational structure, meaning what people call gangs. I don't really like that word, so I usually say prison organizations or prison associations.
mm,
But because of that structure and how powerful those are in some of the prisons, um, then you can be expected to pay for protection, and that can involve different things from commissary to providing sexual favors. One reason that trans person are particularly vulnerable to that is because no trans person can be a part of a prison association. So you're always doing what's called riding solo. So trans persons are, especially ones that are pretty out in the prison system, are known to be solo. So that just makes them a target for extortion because they have no family to back them up
mm.
and to stand for them if they get into trouble. They're always solo. Now, some trans persons do associate or affiliate with prison organizations, but it's partly they're paying for protection. And so that's engaging in that economy, but you're always on a negotiation footing, I guess, in that where your safety is constantly at risk. Um, Another structural thing would be just the way the prison system works in terms of um, the guards not really providing protection, and the kind of status quo of what some people call fight or fuck. And so we've had lots of people report to us that the guards will just say, well, you have to fight or fuck.
Mm.
Um, and that's just so much a part of the prison. And for trans persons also, and really for anybody, but this especially affects trans persons, if you fight, um, you get a disciplinary case and you're put in solitary. If you have sex with somebody, it typically gets worse over time because you've shown that you can be exploited for sex. And so neither one of those are a good situation.
Sure.
What often happens when, due to the grievance system and how that works, if you file a grievance for something, then you again become a target in different ways. So you can become a target from the staff, because oftentimes the staff see trans persons as lower on the prison hierarchy, and so they will negotiate with trans persons. Well, you turn in who's running contraband over here, then we'll get you, some protection. And so then the trans person gets into more trouble because they're snitching on somebody, but they have this hard choice. They're being denied protection for if they don't snitch, but they're being put in more danger if they do. And all of those are part of just kind of structures of the way the prison system works. Did you have something specific you were looking for in terms of structures?
No. I suppose in my mind there is something of a distinction between the guards, the institution, the rules and regulations of the place, and then just the day-to-day experience of being in that culture and of being living through those kind of day-to-day trials. So
You,
yeah,
uh,
I feel like you covered really well what that looks like from a kind of zoomed out view, but it I just have to say generally sounds exhausting.
Yeah, prison is exhausting, not only from the types of things you have to put up with day to day, but even literally because you don't get sleep. The guards come by and wake you up, and almost nobody gets a solid even 6 hours sleep.
Yeah, no doubt. Are there any individual stories that you might be able to share with us to help us understand what it's like being trans in the prison system?
Yeah, there's a choice. um, One, I think that I always think about in terms of kind of the abuses that some trans persons endure. This person is no longer subject to this, thankfully.
Hmm.
But this is a trans man. When he first got into TDCJ, he's assigned to a women's unit. He has had top surgery. He has changed all of his documentation. His driver's license said male. He did this 20 plus years ago. He was an early person who really got some things like documentation done before it was as common as it is today.
Hmm.
Um, when he was first assigned to prison, they forced him to wear a bra, even though he'd had top surgery. They forced him to wear a nightgown. They denied him hormones. Um, they used to take during group strip searches, they would take his clothes when he would strip, they would take his clothes and throw them across the room and make him run across in front of everybody to get his clothes and get them back. Thankfully, he no longer has those issues. It's improved since then.
Hmm.
So that's one type of example. Another one is somebody that we were working with not too long ago, last year. She was assigned to a unit, and previously in her history, what a lot of people will do when they go into prison is they will become affiliated with a gang
Hmm.
or a prison association. And she did that when she first got in. It's a safety issue and kind
Sure.
of a belonging issue. And she was associated with one. I won't mention which one it was, but it can be pretty oppressive.
Hmm.
And then she came out as trans. And once she came out as trans, she is banned from that group. And in
Hmm.
fact, they can actually cause violence. If some units, they'll say, no, you can't walk on this unit. So you have to do something to get off the unit. Well, she's had trouble at many different units since she came out, partly because she has tattoos on her face that are affiliated with this group.
Mm.
And so that is something that you do to prove your loyalty to a group. But once you get out, it does nothing but cause problems.
You're branded in
So,
that way, sure.
yeah, so she was on a unit where it just has a terrible reputation for abusing trans persons in particular. And she started telling us that she was having problems there due to this group saying she could not stay on this unit. And we were able to get her pulled out by writing letters and get her pulled out and put in different housing. So they pulled her out and put her in solitary and did an investigation, then rehoused her. They housed her with as a cellmate with one of the speakers for that very group. And so then she was being sexually abused by this guy. And we were like, no, this doesn't happen. This couldn't happen. But she had given us his name. And we have a way of looking up to see what cell somebody is in. And we were able to confirm that these two people were in the same cell, and even look up news reports to verify that this guy is associated with the group. And so we wrote more letters, and they refused to do anything. We wound up in this case getting a a Texas senator involved, and even he called the unit and said, "You need to get this person away from this unit," and the unit still refused. And eventually the unit did get her to did transfer or approve or recommend her for transfer and send her to a different unit. But we can't figure out why certain things like that happen. But
Why that was
is,
ever allowed in the first place. Sure.
yeah, but that can be somebody's experience as well. Gosh, there's another one. Do you want me to give another one?
I mean, it definitely sounds dark. I suppose I'd be interested to know if you feel as if these stories are becoming more or less common as trans issues become more and more embattled in our culture war.
I think they're shifting.
Mm,
So when we first started writing to persons in the Texas prisons, there were only about 36 out trans persons in the prison. And I think there's just various reasons that this number would have grown, but now there's almost somewhere between 1,100 and 1,200 that are out. And that's probably partly because we're the first organization that was kind of openly supporting trans person and engaging with advocacy for the Texas prison systems for trans persons.
mhm.
And we're fairly well known throughout the prison system. That's meant that some people in the prison system have started creating backlash against us. One
Sure.
prison guard apparently tried to accuse us of running contraband. That person was eventually removed from the prison system, from TDCJ.
Mhm.
But as the number of persons have increased, and as the trans persons in the Texas prison system have become more invisible, there's been a shift in how they're treated, and the mistreatment is a little less obvious, not
Sure.
less harmful
Right.
necessarily. And so some of the really obvious things, like somebody, a counselor at one point, when somebody came out as trans and was asking to get started on hormones, the counselor told this person, "You're letting what did he say? The father of lies talk to you. There is no such thing as trans," or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
And so the person reported it to us. We were able to get a little attention to it. That person it was suggested that they retire. So some things like that are changing, but then the abuses have become more subtle, but not necessarily less.
Our theocracy is just going a little bit underground in some places.
Right. And so we've seen it where currently they're even starting to use appropriate pronouns and names in the Texas system. That's just started last year and this year. But at the same time, you've got certain guards and certain administrators in various units that are
Sure.
very anti-trans. That
I mean,
will,
the demographic overlap, I definitely feel is particularly going to be in conflict with trans folks and trans
right,
rights.
right. So we really thought it would get a lot worse during COVID, that there would be a lot of problems there. But so I think there's not really an exactly obvious way where you can point to, yes, this is getting a lot worse because of the exposure in the public sphere with discussions of trans issues. But the best way I have of describing it is it's shifting so that it's a little bit more subtle, but worse. And sometimes it impacts people more broadly.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you what, we've got a number of calls on the line. So if
Okay.
it's all right with you, I'd like to take a moment and touch base with Simon in Germany. Simon, thank you so much for giving us a call back.
Yeah, nice to meet you, or nice to hear you guys again, or I guess this time just you. And I'm sorry, I forgot the co-host's name. So
Yeah,
So
I believe you spoke with me and Kenneth, but I'm here with Nell
yeah,
tonight, and I'd love for you to take just a quick moment to catch the audience up on what we spoke about a few weeks ago.
yeah. We spoke about my troubles with um, accepting that I'm trans and my struggles on trying to figure out whether I want to transition or not. Especially since I come from a, let's say, non-supportive field.
Sure.
So family would not be supportive. One of my friends would not be supportive. In fact, he is very much not supportive so far. He's very religious, not Christian, but Buddhist. But yeah, yeah, and I had to think about some things, and I said that I would call you guys back when I made at least a preemptive decision for now on what I'm going to do, what I'm going to transition, or what I'm going to do.
Sure. Well, thank you for honoring that. Catch me up on where you're at today.
Yeah, where I'm at today is, to be honest, I have had a bit of like, I wouldn't call it a full-on breakdown, but I have not been doing well lately, like mentally. And related to that, I've also like kind of given up on the idea of ever transitioning. I'm still going to therapy and I'm still getting the diagnosis, and my therapist also is telling me that he thinks it would be best for me to transition to help with my general problems, so like general anxiety disorder or depression, which he thinks is very much correlated to the gender dysphoria, due to people with gender dysphoria just having a generally heightened stress level. So things that would be still manageable in stress for normal people or healthy people would be a bit too much for like trans people. And yeah, but currently I'm thinking of not transitioning because I guess I've always been ridiculed for trying to be who I am. That's always been something that has happened to me. I honestly have never really been happy since I was 10 years old. And I think it might be easier to just carry on and be normal than to like go through with the transition, lose even the few things I have right now, and perhaps not even gain what I want in the first place, which is a family of my own, and which I wouldn't be able to get as easily due to the infertility, and well, that comes from the hormones, and also like the fear that I might never pass. And if I were to go through all this and never pass, then I don't think I would be happy with myself either. So yeah, that's where I am right now.
Yeah. Well, I very much appreciate you sharing your story with us, and I just want to let you know that we definitely support you and whatever you believe is best for you. I do want to gently say that it always feels like forever when you're going through it. You know, in these moments, some of these changes and some of the things that you might like dream about could feel impossibly far away. But I recognize just how challenging the situation you're in truly is. Nell, is there anything that you might be able to offer Simon here?
These are really difficult decisions, and there's a lot of considerations, and follow your sense of what is right for you, and also listen to your counselor, and because they have experience with navigating these types of decisions, and sometimes they can guide you to discover what your feelings are. It's also maybe good to recognize that being trans or transitioning doesn't have to be a binary. So there may be a place where you can feel you're comfortable without fully transitioning socially in some way. Find your own comfort level if a full transition is not something you feel is right for you.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely something that I thought about. I also had these thought exercises with myself where I would like if I could secretly turn female and no one else would see me as that, they would still see me the way I am and only I would see me that way. Would I then be happy? And I thought I probably would be. I think because I don't think I would want to change my personality all too much when I were to transition. I just would feel more like me, I guess. But so far, every time I tried to be more like me, people have hated that, be it family or people in school or the like. So, let's just say I am not a person that tries to go with the flow of things. I'd rather be myself, and being yourself and being an individual is something that in this more collectivistic society that I live in here in Germany is very frowned upon. If you don't think like everyone else does, then you're usually the evil guy or the crazy guy or something. And I fear that if I also transition, that will get worse. I also have in my uni class, there's 2 trans people in there. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed that people whisper behind their backs and be hush hush about oh, are they actually trans? Are they whatever are they? They look so weird. And those are often the very liberal people or the lefty people. So the people that then pretend they're super pro-trans and stuff, and they're the ones that whisper behind the backs, and it didn't give me much confidence.
Sure. There's certainly a lot of challenges here, and the cost-benefit analysis of all of your choices come with razor-thin margins and a lot of bullshit, and I absolutely recognize that. I really appreciate the thought experiment you were describing of wondering what it would be like to just fully be yourself, but to have everybody see this avatar of how you look now. And it made me really wonder what it might feel like for you to be truly seen, to be in a relationship with somebody who would be able to see you as you are and offer kindness and a love and acceptance towards that person. I know that may feel like it is infinity far away right now, and that's okay. I'm definitely not pushing you to disclose anything to anybody that you don't feel safe with, but I certainly hope that that's in your future. To Nell's point, you don't have to fully socially transition in order to experience your gender or to have your gender experienced by somebody that you trust and care about. And I certainly hope for that experience for you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll definitely keep you guys updated if anything changes. I mean, I'm still going to therapy. I'm still getting the diagnosis. May I ask one more question before I leave about the original topic of the show today, before I brought up my own problems?
Yeah, please do.
I wanted to ask, I believe your co-host said that it's not good for trans people in prison to just be put into male and female dorms depending on their genitals. But what would be the the defining factor of where you put the person? Would it be just self identification, or what would the measures be? Like, what's the alternative?
I'm going to be idealistic and say in prisons, we need other ways of dealing with how we address social harm beyond locking people up. I don't think there is a good way to address it in our current system. Probably the problem with having separate facilities for trans persons would be that the prison systems have tended to, when you provide a separate type of facility for a group of people, you then fill that facility with more of those people. So it winds up making the issue of incarceration a bigger problem. Self-identification can be a problem. That's probably in part the best choice right now that we have. And California is actually working with that now. And from what I've heard in talking with some people out there, there are problems they're working through, but there are also good aspects to that. So there's no definite answer as to one thing is the best solution. It's something we're going to have to work with within our system that we have now, and looking forward to a better way of working with and dealing with social harm.
So not to be rude or anything, but wouldn't the better solution then not be to ask the question, what do we do with trans people in prison, and rather how do we generally improve the prison conditions for everyone? Because if you guys do that, then you would automatically, like, I believe that the main problem is just that your prison system is pretty horrible. So if you could like work on that, it might be better than like treating the whole illness will lessen the symptoms than if you just try to weaken the symptoms, you know?
That can be an approach. And certainly that's something we should be doing. But again, sometimes when we make improvements, that means we imprison more people. I think the experience in Europe and in Germany has been quite a bit different. Y'all's prison system, from what I've seen, is much better than ours, and you have improved it without incarcerating more people. In the United States, we incarcerate about, I believe now it's around 600 or 700 persons per 100,000. In most of the rest of the world, and especially in Europe, that number is around or below 100 persons per 100,000 people. And so, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just agreeing with you. I was just saying.
Oh, okay.
I think the main difference between at least the German system, with that one I'm familiar with, and the US system is just the approach of punitive versus rehabilitative incarceration. I believe that the German system is like 90% rehabilitative and 10% incarceration, punitive. Even though it's not like a hotel room or anything, it's still prison, but like I think the approach is very different. I think that's the main problem.
Our system is punitive and dehumanizing. And from what I've read of some of the European systems, they are much more humanizing and work toward reintegrating people back into society instead of separating them and hiding them from society. And so, yes, I would agree that that's a much better way of approaching it.
Yeah, the truth is, Simon, this is not just a issue of trans folks in prisons. This is a issue of people in prisons, and the entire system that we have built is ruled by economics and not by humanity, and is got a lot of problems in it. But thankfully, folks like Nell are doing what they can where they can for those who are most vulnerable. But it feels very, very small in the face of a gigantic problem.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for answering. I wish you guys a great show, and I'll hopefully talk to you later sometime in the next month or so.
Very much hope to hear from you. Take very good care, and we'll talk to you soon and hope for the best.
Thanks for your questions.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, before we take another phone call, let's take a quick moment to see what's been going on around the rest of the ACA.
I speak for no one but myself. That comes from owning the messages that I've ingested from society about men's discomfort with women, with their demand that women be a certain way in order to be consumable. But I'm not a goddamn edible.
That's kind of like the world of evangelicalism. It's, you know, you're dating, and then right away they're like, when are you getting married? And then as soon as you're married, when are you having kids? And you're like, I'm 19.
Slow down. This isn't a Monty Python sketch.
Like, I'm not all about like limiting free speech, but I'm definitely all about not promoting violence and calling for the harm or death of others. And that is absolutely what this is. You're firing up a congregation of people with hate speech.
I find it difficult to believe that anybody thinks that we don't actually exist. You know, and it's an unfalsifiable claim, which is it's fantastic for mental masturbation, especially if you've had a couple of joints.
Did it come out of nowhere?
It was put there by humans. Humans drew lines on a map.
Israelite
that doesn't mean
people
God's real.
Believe something. They're a nation on the planet.
Yeah. Does that make it true?
All right. Well, let's quickly touch base with Nir in New York. Nir, what can we do for you tonight?
Hey, Christy and Neil, how you doing tonight?
Hi, doing fine. Thank you.
Glad to hear from you. What's on your mind?
Great. Yeah, no problem. I hope I'm not too far off topic, because I understand the show is secular sexuality and not sexual relationship talk here. But basically, a good friend of mine, I'm actually a cis heterosexual male. A good friend of mine, we've been hanging out for a few years now, and basically, I'm really, really torn back and forth on maybe trying to move things to the next level. And the issue is that not only am I not 100% sure if she would reciprocate, but also I don't want to only basically want to move things to the next level when I'm looking for a good time. You know what I mean? Because that's the last way I want to treat her. I want to make sure I really want to do this and, you know, go for the long haul and not just, you know, treat her like, you know, like I said, when I want to have a good time rather than, you know, something legit. And I just basically want to be straightforward with her, and I'm not 100% sure how to proceed. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I follow you, but I think we can drop the euphemisms and just be straightforward. For if I'm understanding you correctly, you are saying that this is a relationship that for you is mostly, if not entirely, sexual, and that you're not particularly interested in a loving or romantic connection, and you worry that she may be looking for that, and you don't want to misrepresent yourself. Is that a fair summary?
Well, let's put it this way. It's not sexual right now. I would like it to be, and I wouldn't even be completely opposed to the whole, you know, relationship idea. It is a friend of mine. We've been hanging out for a while. But what I don't want is to say, okay, good, you know, like I said, I might be open to the whole relationship thing, but I don't want to get to that point and then back out and be like, oh, I you know, the physical part's going great, but as far as the relationship goes, I'm not really, you know, into this. And I'm just torn because I can't. It would really suck to put her in that position in the first place and then say, okay, yeah, but, you know, the sex is great, but it's just not, you know, the relationship stuff isn't there as I thought it'd be. And then for her to get hurt, because her getting hurt is the last thing that I would ever want. You know what I'm saying? So I do like her. I love her as a person. She's great. And I might even be interested. I just don't know if I should cross that line and risk her getting hurt, essentially. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, well, I'm going to take it for granted that she is an adult. So the question becomes, is she a consenting adult? Is she a informed consenting adult? You know, really all of this comes down to a conversation, one in which you express basically everything you just said to me. Like, I'm interested. This is what I'm thinking. I don't know where it'll go. I'm not so sure about certain parts, but I'm maybe a little more sure about these parts over here. and to just lay all of that out on the table. You don't have to do it in exactly those terms, and I can appreciate why you want to put a little bit of charm on it, and you want to be suave to a certain extent and keep your cards close to your chest. I can appreciate the mating dance and the ritual and everything that goes into that, but I'd love to encourage you to just tell her how you feel and then talk to her about it and see what she's interested in. For all we know, she is only interested in a sexual relationship herself and has no interest in being romantical with you, or vice versa. The best way to find out is to talk to her about
it. Oh yeah,
I would agree.
I appreciate that. And oh yeah, thank you. Thank you both for your input there. That's great advice. I mean, the thing is that she is a very reasonable person, reasonable adult, as you said. So maybe just that conversation could move things in the right direction. And hey, like you said, it could be both. It could be neither. It could be one or the other. I mean, I guess I will just have to see. So, and you know what? I think I kind of knew that. That was kind of the next step before asking advice. Sometimes it's good to just hear from an outside source. You know what I mean? I love the ACA.
Yeah, it's okay to
be able to talk to, Go ahead.
Yeah, it's okay to be nervous. It's okay not to know how to proceed. It's okay to put your foot in your mouth a little bit when you're having these conversations, and it's okay to pursue something and then change your mind. You have the right to go on a second date without feeling obligated to a third. You have the right to go out on a 30-second date without being obligated to a 33rd. So long as you are being sincere and transparent in the way that you communicate, I think you're going to be in good shape.
Yeah, I think I will just have that talk now. She lives about an hour away, but she stays at my house, a few times a week. So, I got a few days here. No, I definitely will have that talk with her, as soon as I can. I do appreciate it, Christy and Nell. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, good luck. Y'all take care.
Thanks.
All right. Well, let's jump back into the interview a little bit, because even though we're running a little long, I'd like to learn more about Trans Pride Initiative and in particular the type of work that y'all are able to do in this space.
Mainly, what we're doing right now is we do have a community center, and we would like for that to be more of a public space that people come and hang out in. Mainly, though, what we do right now is we come in and write letters. So that's basically what we're doing right now. We get some phone calls from people asking about resources in the area. For instance, somebody called me yesterday. They're having some trouble with it sounded like a poor housing situation that they didn't want to give a lot of details on, and maybe a little sexual violence. And so we talked to them about what's going on as best we can and give them some direction. This is a trans person who is having issues not only with these things, but also with accessing healthcare and basic support for trans identity. They were a new resident in this area. And so we do things like that. That's mainly just support work. But primarily right now, we're just trying to keep up with the volume of mail that we get in from people in prison.
Yeah. Well, walk me through that a little bit. How effective is letter writing, and what does that process look like?
I would have to say I think it's fairly effective, but it depends on how you're defining effective. So the process would be that first we get letters that come in, we triage them. So we may get 50 letters a week. And the first thing is I will read through the letter and make a decision whether this is a priority or emergency letter, needs an urgent reply, or it goes in our regular backlog. And then we'll also classify the incidents of violence that are mentioned in the letter. So we started many years ago documenting every piece of quantifiable violence that we can in the system to keep track of what's being reported to us. So we'll record that in our database and then put it in our backlog. And then the backlog goes into a spreadsheet, and we have some remote volunteers that take letters and write letters. And so that process is basically looking at the letter and figuring out how to respond to the person. We don't consider ourselves a pen pal group. So a lot of times we're not building exactly a personal relationship, and we can't guarantee the same person will respond every time, but we will respond to every letter as long as the person's not being rude or abusive or something. And mainly what we do is address problems with violence or other issues that people are having. And this could be from assaults to sexual violence to just frustrations and dehumanizing actions. And so I think there's two ways that it could be considered effective. One would be that it's effective because people have a space to vent to that's affirming of their sexual orientation or gender identity. It doesn't matter what your identity is, we're going to affirm that. And they don't often have that inside. They may be alone, and they've finally got somebody that will listen to them. Even if we're not doing anything that specifically helps their situation, they can vent to us. The second thing is that, well, I think kind of proof that that helps is that, as I mentioned earlier, when we first started doing this, there were about 30 to 35 people in the system identified as trans. Now there's over 1,100, somewhere between 11 and 1,200. And so people started having the courage to come out, and we became known, and it became known that there was a support group out there, I think, and that gave more people the courage to come out. There's also groups that are now helping each other. So you've got some people inside who have more access to commissary. They'll share their commissary with other trans persons that are more indigent and can't afford things like toothpaste and stuff. We've got a trans person on one unit that's starting a group called Our Voices to allow trans persons to come together and just talk about their issues and talk about their identity and problems in the prison system. So in that case, it can be indirectly effective because it can be empowering and humanizing in a very dehumanizing system. The other thing is can letter writing be effective in addressing problems and issues? And I think it is, probably. Some of the things that we've done, we've consistently hit the administration by saying, if you do not address people by their affirming name and affirming pronouns, that causes suicidal ideation, that causes other problems, that's disrespectful, and it increases the likelihood of violence, it increases the likelihood of sexual violence within the prison system. How you treat people is going to affect their experience of violence, and you're abetting that violence. Well, last year, they kind of changed, and they started calling people by their pronouns and even their affirming names sometimes now. So I think in a sense that's helped. It's also helped where, for example, the person I mentioned who was in the cell with the person that was abusing them, and we eventually got them out. We've had several people who have said we've saved their lives because we wrote to the right or somebody wrote to the right person. I don't know that it's always us. Sometimes we get credit for things we didn't do, probably. But we're there, and we're one of several different avenues toward advocating for a person. And so I think it can be effective. I think also letter writing, it de-invisibilizes.
Yeah, sure.
You start bringing people and their situation out into the light, whereas the prisons are a very opaque systems. And so you want that, this helps bring it into the light, what's happening, and it helps humanize people rather than just shutting them away and warehousing them and ignoring them. We've had people who've said that they have been I guess, dropped by pen pals before, and they like writing to us because they know that we'll answer every letter, and that makes them feel much more appreciated and valued and human.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's arguable that how much it helps and how it helps, but I think certainly it does help.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not the tool that I would like to hand to you, but it doesn't mean that it isn't powerful or that it doesn't have a lot to offer.
And partly we're also doing data collection. So in 2018, we were presented with an opportunity to go, we thought we were going to be presented with an opportunity to go talk to the some Texas senators about TDCJ's failure to comply with the PREA standards, and that didn't work out. So instead of going and talking to them, we published a report on how TDCJ does not comply with PREA standards. And that was actually somebody with the National Center for Lesbian Rights, a lobbyist with them, then saw that and wrote to us and said, can you send this to every legislator in Washington, D.C. that deals with the Texas prison system? And he sent us the email list to do that. So we use our data that we collect to then further advocate for more broad issues in addressing this. And we look at it as we're not reformists. We want to be abolitionists. And so we try not to take a reformist stance on doing this, but to look at it as we're throwing sand in the gears of the machine to eventually destroy it. And so...
can you just very briefly walk us through that for the audience, the difference between prison reform and prison abolition?
Oh,
I know
sure.
that's a huge question, but...
It is, but prison reform basically says you can change things to alter the system as it exists now and improve it. And we address this a little bit with Simon from Germany. There are some positives for reform, but a lot of people who are on the more abolitionist side will say that no, reform will never do away with prison as harm. And at least the way the prison systems are designed in the US, it's very retributive, meaning punishing. And so abolitionists will say, we kind of have a reputation for saying you need to burn the prisons down. And in a sense, that's true. That's what we're saying. But abolition is more about building up. So it's about building alternative systems to just punishing harm. And so there's another idea that often goes along with abolitionist prison abolition and abolitionist thought, and that's transformative justice. And transformative justice recognizes that the situations that are involved in a person engaging in criminalized behavior are not isolated to that person, but they take place in a large social context. And so, for example, trans persons are more deeply affected or more adversely affected and more disproportionately, that's the word I'm trying to think, disproportionately affected by the prison system because we're shut out from more standard economy. We have a harder time getting jobs. We have a harder time with education in the sense that a lot of people experience bullying when they're kids in school, and so they drop out or they do less in achieving their educational potential. So this pushes people toward a couple of different things. One, you would say greater less self-esteem, which increases risky behavior, which can also influence engaging in street economies. And that, of course, puts you more in direct interaction with police and the justice system, and then essentially the prison system. So addressing these issues, these root sources, that's part of what transformative justice is. So we need to develop more systems of empowering people to be successful in their lives outside of criminalized behavior. That is what gets people into prisons in the first place.
Sure.
And I think that whole discussion about what is criminalized behavior and things like that's another big discussion.
No question. I mean, we could absolutely be here for years. And a certain part of me wishes that we were, or to say it another way, I wish that we were thinking about these things a lot more thoughtfully as a culture, as a society, that we were much less interested in CSI and Law and Order, and we're actually like worried about these people that we are shoving in boxes forever and ever.
Less drama, more reality.
Yeah, fair to say. Well, with all that in mind, what are some of the successes that your organization has seen in the last couple of years?
Well, we've had some pretty decent stuff outside of the prison system. So if you don't mind, I'll mention a few of those. One is that when we first started, we one of the things we did was we were involved in the healthcare industry. And so we started calling UT Southwestern Medical School and specifically targeting their Center for Breast Care to get them to address that trans persons need breast screenings and chest screenings as well. And at first they completely blew us off. It took a year of phone calls. And then finally a manager called and said, we've been looking at what you've been saying and we figured out we've missed an entire demographic. When can we call?
Yeah, shockingly.
Right. Another thing we did was we were trying to get low-income trans persons access to general physical and general wellness care along with hormone therapy, because that's just so rare that you get that combination. And so we worked with Parkland Health, trying to influence them to accept trans persons at their neighborhood clinics that they have, about 28 of them around Dallas, and ran into brick walls everywhere there. And finally, we wound up threatening them and taking some additional actions. Parkland doesn't have it on their website, but they now have 2 trans clinics. And so that was the result of several things, but I'm really proud that we really pushed hard. And I think we started that and got it most of the way through until we were shut out of the process. Basically, they didn't want to deal with us anymore.
I mean, that means you're doing something right. Like just
right,
the
if you're
list
pissing
of people you've
off, you're doing
offended.
it right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another thing we did was DART is Dallas Area Rapid Transit. And so we have dealt with some issues where trans persons were discriminated against in that. And we didn't have much luck working with DART. It's pretty conservative and really not very good to deal with. But we came up with this idea and we teamed with another group to look at what's called the master agreement that's national. And in the master agreement, it has a non-discrimination clause, and every public transit entity that accepts federal funds has to include this non-discrimination policy. And so we got gender identity and expression added to that under the passenger rights section. So we actually, with this other group, that's another local Dallas group, got that changed nationally. We've never been able to get any attention to it, so people don't know it's there, but that was
but it's on the books. I mean, that does count for something. That does matter when we start writing new books and when we actually have to return to what's written down and follow policy, should anybody ever actually force us to.
And then there was something that we tried to get. Most of the advocates in the Dallas area thought that the Dallas jail actually had a trans policy. And we found out that they didn't, through addressing some issues that were there. The sheriff, this is Lupe Valdez, and she tried to lie and say, yeah, we have something. We finally found out, no, they didn't. It was an informal policy, which doesn't count. And so we tried for quite a while to get them to just talk to us, and then they wouldn't do it. And so I wrote the policy, or TPI wrote the policy, and said, okay, you won't talk to us. Here's a policy. And so we researched different policies around the United States and kind of took the best and then added our own things that we thought would be a little bit better. They didn't like that, and they still didn't want to talk to us. So we got the Department of Justice involved, and the Department of Justice forced them to at least talk to us. They threw out our policy and came up with something really crappy. And we just looked at it and we kind of worked with them a little bit, saying, no, you need to change this and this. But apparently their attorneys got it and they said, no, this won't work. And they actually implemented most of what was in the original policy we proposed. And so that's actually now the Dallas Police and Sheriff's Office policy for both field interactions and for the prison housing practices. And so those are some things we've done.
Yeah, what an incredible thing to have your fingerprints on. You know, I know it's far from perfect, but to have had any impact on putting that in place feels invaluable.
Well, and I think there's also, the last thing with prison work, I think, is when we look at what movement building is, that's what Trans Pride was really initially meant to be, is kind of a movement building organization. We wanted to inspire people to get involved and to do different things. And then we would try to build different committees that worked on different areas of social need. We haven't figured out how to do that in the free world, but I think we've done that some in the prison system because we've built up a group of people that are now exchanging information. We trade, when we send letters and kind of fact sheet things in, they share it between themselves. We've actually built a bit of a trans movement inside the Texas prison system.
Beautiful. Well, I want to make sure to leave a little bit of time to check in with you about some next steps and resources, but I also wanted to quickly, if we can, check in with Drew in Washington. Drew, what can you tell us tonight?
So I was going to talk about a couple things, but as you guys were talking to Simon, because I was here for a while, actually a couple things came into my mind. Is Simon still there?
No, you're just here with Nell and myself. What were you calling in about tonight?
Okay. So the next time you come across her, I was wondering if you could just give her a couple tips or whatever, because this is the first thing I wanted to talk about first.
Yeah, well, I believe Simon is
myself.
likely watching right now. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I myself am trans, female to male, and I have a really high voice. I mean, I hate it, but whatever, it'll be here until I change it. So a couple things is the first thing, if you do want to transition, but you also want kids, there's a couple things you could do, because I'm not sure if Germany has this, but I'm pretty sure they do. You could either because Simon is male to female or whatever, save the sperm, or just have kids before she does the transition. And another thing is to just do things at work in order to make you appear more that way. Some of the things I do is I wear bigger shirts, and I actually are my size. I'm supposed to be a small because I'm a really tiny person, but I wear a medium instead, and it makes me seem more like a dude. But yeah, basically that's just what I wanted to say about that. Because find things that work with you. The main thing that I wanted to talk about is actually about I'm gonna probably be very quick.
Sure.
Maybe not too quick, but is the anti-gay quotes within the Bible, because there aren't too many, but there's some,
Sure. Yeah, but 6 to 8 different verses depending on how you look at it, if you really want to dive into it, which quite frankly, I'm over it, generally speaking. I don't particularly care about that particular piece of ancient poetry, but it does have a lot of sway in our world. So tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, so the thing I noticed in the first part, because I actually found an article on this one religious site. I can't remember the article at the moment, but it listed, I think, 6 or 7 of them. And one thing, a thing I noticed is that most of them were anti-male or whatever, and one of them was anti-female and anti-male at the same time. And I think this is very important to note, because I myself, like I said, I'm a trans dude, but I'm gay, gay identified or whatever. I like dudes. And so once I transition, this has gone through society in many ways. It's infiltrated it or whatever, and I'm pretty sure the Quran didn't even have anti-LGBT things. It certainly had anti-atheist things from what I've heard. And then Christianity or whatever spread it. I mean, infecting it. So yeah, and most of the time it's affected men more. I'm pretty sure the reason why the anti-gay laws in the U.S. were shot down were because they were anti-male specifically, if I remember correctly, and because it was gender discrimination, And
there's definitely a lot to be said about the way that particularly our modern evangelical movement has decided to lift out a very small number of specific passages from the Bible and talk about how male and female, he made them. And it's upsetting because it's a bunch of ancient bullshit. So we don't need to care about it, or at least we ought not have to. But also B, there are so many things in that book that our elected officials don't care about. that are
and a lot of
preachers
ridiculous.
and everybody else. Yeah, there's just so much in that book that nobody is paying attention to, that for them to amplify these specific things, it clearly shows you like what the agenda is and where it's coming from. So I appreciate you kind of highlighting that for us. Was there anything else that you wanted to mention to Nell or myself before we wrap up for the night?
Well, I just wanted to expand a little bit more on that before I because that's just the one thing I wanted to talk about. So just a little bit more about that, and then I'll be done.
Yeah, we're close to the end of the show,
So,
but please tell me what's on your mind.
Yeah. So it's just affected like men more, as I said, and it's just like put lots of laws in place and stuff. And like one of the things is that, like I said, I'm gonna be like a gay dude after I finish my transition, and I'm not gonna go around saying like I'm just like a trans person everywhere I go, and so I'm just gonna look like a gay dude, and so this is gonna like put me at a certain kind of risk, you know. And like if I ever went outside, because I stay inside a lot, I would look a lot darker because I'm several races, and that would add on to it. So yeah, and like some of my friends, like a lot of my friends are like international, you know. There's this one friend in the UK who's a gay guy, and I have another one in Europe who's not in the UK. And he's also like had to hide himself a lot because he's just like been really afraid of coming out about it. And so yeah, like he's just like can't even come out to his family or anything like that because his society's like really homophobic, really transphobic and stuff like that. And my friend in the UK also can't talk about it too much because like he also got like I think 2 girls, like he didn't know exactly why, but this may have been part of the reason. 2 girls released a bunch of dudes on him, and he got assaulted because of it, like really badly.
Yeah,
And
no, I'm so
like,
terribly
the
sorry
other
to hear
night,
it.
I'm gonna
These
actually
intersectional identities are especially vulnerable, and I really appreciate you sharing all of that with us. Before we let you go, I certainly don't mean to tell you about your gender, but for what it's worth, from a cis stranger on the internet, I would just love to let you know that whether you choose to transition or whatever transition looks like for you, wherever you find yourself on your gender journey, that if you are telling me right now that you're a man, you get to be a gay dude today. You are a gay dude. If that's how you identify, if that's how you see yourself, you certainly have permission for me, for whatever that's worth, to be who you are now, regardless of what changes you might make cosmetically, regardless of what changes you might make socially. If you're telling me that you're a gay dude, you're gay. Thanks so much for calling us tonight.
Yeah, it's pretty nice talking to you.
Glad to hear it. You have a great night. All right. Well, no, there is so much that we haven't gotten to really poke at, and I know that this is such an incredibly huge topic, but I think the most important question that I really have for you before we step out the door tonight is just, what is the best way for people who are watching tonight to be part of the solution here?
I think one thing would be, if you want to look into prison abolition and problems within the prison system, get involved with any local group that's doing work with persons incarcerated or with addressing problems in the prison system locally. Nobody has all the answers, and this is something we're working on collectively everywhere, in the sense that there are lots of different local or regional groups that are working on prison problems and prison issues. If you want to get involved, find any local group that's doing this work and get involved in them. There's also remotely, you can get involved in different actions like letter writing. So this letter writing is something that can be done remotely from anywhere, addressing persons in prisons anywhere. And so there are some things like, of course, our work is remote, and people can get involved in that way. But there's also Black and Pink, which is a specifically an organization that specifically provides pen pals for LGBTQ and HIV affected persons. And so it's specifically supporting this segment of our prison prison population with pen pals. And so they have a really good system that's set up to provide support and provide connections with people. Another one is Prisoner Correspondence Project out of Canada. And so if we have any listeners up in Canada, I know Prisoner Correspondence Project, I believe they're out of Toronto. I know they're short-staffed and they're always needing help with their pen pal connections up there. Last I heard, they were about 6 months behind. So things like that, if you can get involved in local efforts or with a letter writing or other prison support programs at a distance, those are really good ways to learn and to get involved in some way in prison abolition work.
Mm-hmm. Are there any particular places that you might point people towards who want to learn more about what's going on and how they can be part of a solution here?
Sure. Our blog, so our website is tpi.org, and we have a blog up on our main menu. If you click on that, then you can go to the resources link up in the upper right hand corner, and we list several things there. And so that's one starting place. Some I would point out would be things like Dean Spade. Dean Spade is a trans man who started Sylvia Rivera Law Project. He's also an attorney, and he is very involved in prison abolition and transformative justice. And he's a great person in looking at mutual aid efforts and building our community toward things that are not incarceration and not punitive or retributive justice systems. He's also big in the mutual aid movement. Interrupting criminalization is another good place I like. Some authors that might be worth looking at. Victoria Law has a couple of really accessible books. One is called Prison by Any Other Name, and another one is called Prisons Make Us Safer and Other Myths About the American Incarceration System. And so those are really accessible books that people can look at to get a little bit more educated on some of the trends in prison abolition and incarceration justice.
Well, if anybody didn't catch any of those, I'll make sure to have all of it listed in the show notes for this episode. But let's also take a moment and check out your links and get that up on the screen again. Can you tell people again where they can find Trans Pride Initiative?
Okay, these are my proud puppies, Mika and Bruce, and they are prison abolition puppies. And so, but
I support their mission.
If you want to connect with us, we have this bit.ly TPI email list. You're welcome to sign up for our email list. We have general emails that go out about 4 times a year, and twice a month we have emails that come out specifically for joining our prison letters work. So you're welcome to join there, and then you'll get those emails, or find us on social media or our website for further information.
Great. Well, let me take a quick moment before we walk out tonight to remind people about tiny.cc/AEN podcast, where you can get a audio only version of all of the different shows taking place around the ACA. To, of course, remind people about the Secular Sexuality Facebook fan group, where you can find some of the notes that I've been talking about, as well as our merch store you saw flash on the screen, where we have all kinds of new projects coming out and a lot of really, really great stuff. I can't tell you how ridiculously satisfying it is to have a very dumb idea and then to say it on the internet, and then to have somebody make a t-shirt of it, and then to see people wear that t-shirt. I don't belong here. I don't understand how anybody has given me this power, but please wear my stupid t-shirts. They're fantastic. And then perhaps the most important part of our night, where we take a moment to see all of the incredibly hardworking people that helped to make this show happen. The folks that were here well before I was. Plenty of folks who aren't on screen, but these are the much too sexy for the crew Camsters. Thank you all for being here. And before we end tonight, I guess I wanted to take a quick moment and just see what your final thoughts are that you wanted to leave with the audience tonight. You know, we've talked about a lot of really big and important things, And I'm curious what you think is the most important thing for us to kind of keep in our minds as we continue to navigate this very messy, messy world.
Get involved. We address the issues when we get involved, and so that's just kind of the main thing. Prison's a hidden population, and it's largely invisible. There's something that we sometimes call the churn, and that is the number of people that go in and out of a prison system or prison systems each year. And in the United States, that churn number is about 10 million people. To give you an idea of what that number is, that is more than the combined populations of New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, Montana, Delaware, South Dakota, North Dakota, Alaska, Vermont, and Wyoming. That is what churns through the prison systems in the United States every year. So learn about the system and the harm it causes people, because it's lifetime harm, and learn about the ways that can be the ways that we're looking at addressing that are not just increasing the harm.
If only our formerly incarcerated population had the number of senators as all of the states that you just listed. I better be careful, because we will fall down that rabbit hole and we will start talking about things that we're all a little bit uncomfortable to talk about as a society. But I so appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us tonight and to kind of highlight some of these incredible issues.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I know it's been a little bit more of a somber night. I know that some of these stories are incredibly challenging. So hope everybody listening will take good care of themselves. If any of this conversation felt a little triggering, you have all the permission in the world to step aside for a little bit, to take care of yourself in whatever way that looks like. And of course, when you're ready, when you are feeling up to it, we always would like to invite you to give yourself a big old orgasm. Or better yet, give somebody else one.
Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.